If you are listening to this right now, you are likely a professional planner deep in preparation for a major certification exam. You're probably, mastering zoning codes, navigating complex bylaws, memorizing provincial frameworks.
All the heavy lifting.
Right. But today, we're looking at a topic that proves land use planning is about much more than just drawing lines on a map.
Oh, absolutely.
It is fundamentally about repairing history, untangling complex jurisdictions, and really building transformative relationships.
And that is the exact mindset you need for this material. So, our objective today is to thoroughly unpack Dr. Sherry Longboat's article, Beyond Consultation, Lessons from Joint Stewardship.
Yes, a crucial read for the exam.
It really is. This text is a critical component of your exam preparation. We're going to explore the legal precedents, the policy shifts, and a highly detailed case study so that you understand the mechanics of this evolution inside and out.
So the overarching theme here, the big picture of Dr. Longboat's work, is that the landscape of Indigenous consultation is undergoing a massive shift. It's moving away from this bare minimum check-the-box legal requirement.
Which it was for a very long time.
Exactly. And evolving into a proactive, collaborative model known as joint stewardship.
Precisely. And understanding that specific trajectory, going from a forced legal mandate to genuine grassroots collaboration, that's the key to synthesizing this entire subject.
Definitely.
To get there, the discourse perfectly tracks the structure of the article itself. So we move from the legal and policy landscape to the federal and international shifts, and finally into how this all plays out on the ground in a specific case study in Hamilton, Ontario.
So let's start with that legal and policy landscape. If you're operating in Ontario, the legislative environment has been forcing this evolution for decades.
Yeah, there's a clear timeline.
Right, and Dr. Longboat points to 4 specific pieces of provincial legislation that have steadily increased the requirement for First Nations engagement in land use planning. You will want to have these memorized.
I highly recommend writing these down.
First is the Environmental Assessment Act of 1990. Then the Heritage Act, also 1990. The Planning Act of 2005. And finally, the Far North Act of 2010.
And over time, those 4 laws have essentially mandated a higher level of joint development when it comes to land use plans affecting traditional territories.
Yes.
But it's really important to understand that simply passing a law doesn't automatically create a functional collaborative relationship.
Oh, definitely not. And actually, the Far North Act of 2010 is a perfect example of that friction.
It really is.
When you read the text, there's this fascinating detail about how First Nations initially opposed the Far North Act, which, you would think a law designed to protect northern lands would be universally welcomed.
You would think so.
But the opposition stemmed from the way the act was developed.
Exactly. It was developed unilaterally.
Right.
The provincial government drafted the legislation without sufficient, meaningful input from the Indigenous communities whose ancestral lands were directly impacted.
Top-down approach.
A classic top-down approach, which ironically highlighted the exact problem that joint stewardship is meant to solve. I mean, you cannot mandate collaboration without actually collaborating on the mandate itself.
That is a great distinction to make for the exam. However, the province did continue to adjust its approach. By the time we get to the 2014 Provincial Policy Statement, the language becomes much more explicit.
It does.
The statement formally recognizes the critical importance of consulting with Indigenous communities on any planning matters that might affect their rights and interests.
But we have to look deeper and ask why. Why did the province suddenly start embedding these stronger consultation requirements into their policy statements?
Right, because politicians didn't just wake up one day and decide to overhaul the system.
No, they did not. The true catalyst for this shift was the judicial branch. The courts forced their hand.
And for your exam, understanding the role of the Supreme Court is absolutely non-negotiable.
Truly. There are 4 landmark Supreme Court of Canada decisions that establish the modern legal framework for consultation. Listeners, pay attention to these.
Go ahead and list them.
They are Haida Nation v. British Columbia, Taku River Tlingit First Nation v. British Columbia, Mikisew Cree First Nation v. Canada, and Silquoian Nation v. British Columbia.
These aren't just names to memorize. They represent a fundamental restructuring of Crown-Indigenous relations.
Exactly. Take the Haida Nation case, for example. In that situation, the provincial government tried to transfer tree harvesting licenses on Haida Gwaii to a large forestry company.
And they did this without asking or involving the Haida people who had claimed title to the land.
Right. The Supreme Court stepped in and unequivocally stated that the Crown has a, quote, duty to consult and accommodate indigenous peoples whenever it contemplates actions that might adversely impact asserted or proven treaty rights.
Duty to consult and accommodate.
Write that phrase down. It's vital.
So the courts essentially built a legal wall that prevents unilateral development. But what does this friction actually look like on the ground?
That's the million-dollar question for planners.
Right. When a municipality and an indigenous community end up in court, what are the core issues they're actually fighting over?
Dr. Longboat outlines that the heart of these disputes generally revolves around four interconnected areas:
Okay.
land ownership, land use and development, access, and the control over natural resources within traditional or ancestral territories.
Which for a planner, those four areas are basically your entire job description.
Exactly. And the reality is constantly complicated by overlapping jurisdictions. You've got municipal bylaws, provincial ministries, and federal oversight all colliding on the exact same piece of land.
Which is a perfect pivot to the federal and international context.
Yeah.
Because in 2016, the landscape shifted again.
A major shift.
Prime Minister Trudeau made a full commitment to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, universally referred to as UNDRIP.
UNDRIP contains 46 articles, but for the purposes of land use planning and your professional understanding, Dr. Longboat highlights two that are absolutely paramount.
Okay, let's break those down.
Article 18 and Article 19. Article 18 affirms the right of indigenous peoples to participate in decision-making in matters which would affect their rights.
That seems relatively straightforward. You have a right to participate.
It does, but Article 19 takes it to a completely different level.
So,
Article 19 introduces the requirement to obtain, quote, free, prior, and informed consent before adopting or implementing legislative or administrative measures that affect them.
free, prior, and informed consent.
Often acronymized as FPIC. That phrase is revolutionary. It shifts the entire dynamic.
Because prior to this, consultation often looked like a government agency presenting a nearly finished plan.
Exactly. They'd show up with a 500-page document.
And simply asking for an opinion, which, honestly, they could then legally ignore.
Right. Article 19 moves the needle from asking for an opinion to requiring actual consent.
It demands that indigenous communities are at the table from day one.
Day one. Before any decisions are made, with all the necessary information and without any coercion.
It changes the power dynamic completely. But the article also makes it clear that indigenous communities are not just sitting around waiting for the federal or provincial governments to figure out how to navigate this new dynamic.
Oh, absolutely not. They are incredibly proactive.
They recognize the delays and confusion within government bureaucracies.
Yeah, so they're developing their own consultation and accommodation protocols. And they are grounding these protocols deeply in their own ancestral knowledge and indigenous legal traditions.
Taking matters into their own hands.
Exactly. And if a government or a developer steps out of line, they continue to use the courts to aggressively challenge infringements.
At the same time, they're bypassing government bottlenecks altogether by working directly with the private sector.
Right, to secure long-term economic opportunities for their communities.
When you look at all of this together, the Supreme Court mandates, UNDRIP, the proactive indigenous protocols, it represents a profound paradigm shift.
It really does.
And it would be very easy for a planner, someone studying for this exam, to view this complex, multi-layered landscape as a massive logistical hurdle.
It is a hurdle if you are only interested in compliance. But Dr. Longboat encourages planners to view this as a rare opportunity.
An opportunity to reset.
To completely reset multi-level intergovernmental relationships. Because from an indigenous perspective, this isn't just about zoning.
Right.
It is about rekindling the historic relationships established by their ancestors.
Yeah.
It's about adhering to original instructions and establishing genuine guiding principles for coexistence with one another and with the natural world.
Moving from a mindset of compliance to a mindset of coexistence.
That is the big picture takeaway.
It's an incredibly powerful idea.
Yeah.
But a concept like that needs a concrete example to prove it works in reality.
And that brings us to the centerpiece of Dr. Longboat's article.
The case study of the Red Hill Valley Joint Stewardship Board, or the JSB.
Yes. Let's set the scene in Hamilton, Ontario.
To understand the magnitude of what the JSB accomplished, you really have to understand the intensity of the conflict that preceded it.
It was intense.
The city of Hamilton wanted to construct the Red Hill Valley Parkway, a major transportation corridor straight through a valley system.
Right, and for the city, this was a vital infrastructure project to ease traffic, boost the local economy, and they firmly believed they had sole jurisdiction and the legal right to build it under the Provincial Municipal Act.
But on the other side, you had the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Chiefs Council,
The HCC.
right, the traditional government of the Six Nations. And they strongly opposed the development. They asserted their rights over the valley based on the 1701 Nanfan Treaty.
Now, keep in mind, this was a treaty established long before Canada was even a country.
Exactly. It protected their hunting grounds and stewardship rights over that specific territory.
So you have two completely different worldviews and two completely different legal frameworks colliding head-on.
The city is pointing to a modern provincial statute.
And the Haudenosaunee are pointing to a pre-Confederation treaty.
This wasn't just a polite disagreement at a city council meeting.
No, it resulted in intense protests, legal injunctions, and years of bitter, deadlocked conflict.
So how do you get out of a deadlock where neither side recognizes the other's ultimate authority?
The breakthrough came in 2003 with the Joint Stewardship Agreement, which officially established the Joint Stewardship Board.
The JSB. And this is where it gets fascinating, because the JSB wasn't just some vague memorandum of understanding to, try and get along.
Far from it. It was an incredibly detailed, comprehensive restructuring of how that valley would be managed. Between 2003 and 2004, the city and the HCCC sat down and negotiated a sweeping breadth of specific agreements.
The text provides a clear table of these agreements, and the scope is remarkable. You want to be familiar with this for the exam.
Very familiar.
They didn't just agree on the road. They signed agreements concerning the respect for and protection of human burials found in the valley. They negotiated strict protocols for archaeological work. They established agreements regarding Haudenosaunee rights to hunting, fishing, trapping, and gathering within the valley.
They even went into economic specifics. They negotiated agreements on how toll revenues would be handled, agreements protecting traditional medicine plants, and an overarching framework respecting the human heritage of the entire Red Hill Valley.
And through the actual construction and the subsequent restoration of the parkway, the JSB became this vehicle for deep knowledge integration.
They jointly undertook environmental monitoring, ecological restoration, species at-risk assessments, and the active recovery of those traditional medicine plants.
But, an agreement on paper is just paper.
Right.
Did this actually translate to a permanent shift in the relationship? The text notes that Dr. Longboat evaluated the JSB 5 years after the final restoration plans were completed.
The highway was built.
The highway was built.
Yeah.
So did they just dissolve the board and go their separate ways?
No, and that is the true success of the model. The JSB didn't dissolve once the asphalt was poured.
It kept it going.
They transitioned their focus toward future monitoring, long-term valley planning, and they are currently developing an environmental interpretive center.
Wow.
They took a highly localized, bitter conflict and engineered it into a permanent, collaborative institution.
This case study is the absolute heart of the material you need to master.
Without a doubt.
Dr. Longboat distills the success of the Red Hill Valley JSB into 4 key lessons for planners.
If you are faced with a complex scenario question on your exam regarding joint stewardship, these 4 lessons form your analytical framework. Let's tag team these.
Let's break them down meticulously, starting with lesson 1. Find common ground upon which to build.
This is perhaps the hardest step because it requires setting aside ego and absolute legal claims.
Like we discussed, the Haudenosaunee asserted rights under the 1701 Nanfan Treaty.
And the city claimed ultimate jurisdiction under the Municipal Act. If they had stayed in a room debating who held the supreme title to the land,
They'd still be arguing today.
literally still be arguing.
So instead of an endless debate over rights and jurisdiction, they made a conscious, strategic decision to focus on shared responsibilities.
Yes.
They stripped the conflict down to the one thing they both genuinely cared about, which was the ecological health and well-being of the Red Hill Valley itself.
By making the valley's health the shared priority, they created a foundation they could actually build a relationship on, which naturally leads to lesson 2. Respect and incorporate indigenous approaches.
This is so important.
It's one thing for an indigenous community to sign a Western legal contract drafted by municipal lawyers. It is quite another for that agreement to carry weight and legitimacy within the indigenous community itself.
Right, for the Haudenosaunee, it was a fundamental requirement that this new relationship be validated through their own traditions.
And the details here are vital for your understanding of how true integration works.
The Western agreements were culturally legitimized through the presentation of the Fire of the Valley wampum to the mayor of Hamilton.
A wampum is a traditional shell bead belt or string used to record agreements and treaties.
In this specific case, the Fire of the Valley wampum consisted of 3 strings of beads, and those 3 strings signify the core principles of respect, trust, and friendship.
Presenting this wasn't just a photo opportunity, it was a deeply binding recognition of the commitment and responsibility they now had to one another.
And they didn't just use indigenous traditions at the signing ceremony.
No, they embedded them into the ongoing governance structure. Every single JSB meeting is opened and closed with a Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address,
The Mohawk term for this is Owen, Karutan Gariwatakwina.
which translates to words before all else, greetings to the natural world.
By opening their administrative meetings this way, they ensure the indigenous perspective isn't just some afterthought.
Exactly, it is the lens through which all business is conducted.
It grounds the procedural work in a deeper philosophy. But that brings us to a very practical reality, which is Lesson 3, address capacity issues.
Always comes down to resources.
As a professional planner, you know that grand visions and cultural alignment will fail if you don't have the budget to execute them.
They absolutely will. A massive barrier to Indigenous participation in these planning processes is simply a lack of financial resources to carry out the necessary technical and administrative activities.
Meaningful participation requires funding.
You cannot ask a community to participate in complex, time-consuming ecological assessments and negotiations without providing the resources to do so.
So the city of Hamilton recognized this limitation and addressed it head-on by making a direct financial commitment.
They provided a dedicated, ongoing budget to support the administration of the JSB. And crucially, they funded a dedicated staff member whose sole job was to coordinate JSB activities.
Acting as a reliable, full-time resource link between the municipal government and the Six Nations community. Now, that sounds like a significant municipal expense. How does a city justify that to its taxpayers?
They justify it through the return on investment.
Oh, interesting.
Because the city and the HCCC built a credible, fully funded, and highly structured board, they suddenly became an incredibly attractive partner for outside funding.
Ah, I see.
The completed and proposed ecological projects of the JSB began attracting grants, provincial resources, academic partnerships.
So the initial financial commitment from the city wasn't just a sunk cost.
Not at all. It was seed money that brought the communities together and actually generated new resources that benefited everyone.
That is brilliant planning.
It really is.
But to manage those resources and those relationships, you need, Lesson 4, create structure and processes.
Right. You have the agreements, you have the cultural alignment, and you have the funding. Now you have to operationalize all of that into day-to-day actions.
The JSB had to carve out clear processes for how city staff and Six Nations representatives would actually work together without stepping on each other's toes.
They established a clear terms of reference so everyone understood their roles. They set up routine, mandatory monthly meetings.
And there's a small but highly impactful detail here.
Yes.
Those meetings strictly rotate between the two communities. They don't just meet at City Hall.
By rotating the locations, they ensure that neither side ever settles into a home court advantage. It maintains the balance of power.
They also appointed a specific city staff liaison to cut through municipal red tape. And what I find most practical is that they didn't try to invent an entirely new bureaucratic system from scratch.
No need to. They adapted existing procedures from both sides that were already proven to be effective.
Dr. Longboat uses a quote to describe this strategy that perfectly sums it up. The goal was, quote, not to reinvent the wheel, but rather capitalize on the strengths of each community.
That phrase captures the absolute essence of joint stewardship. It is not about erasing the municipal system to favor the indigenous system, or vice versa.
It's about identifying the structural synergies between the two. So when you look at the entire scope of this material, from the initial provincial acts to the Red Hill Valley case study, how should a planner synthesize this for their professional practice?
The ultimate takeaway for your exam is a profound understanding of the difference between a mandate and a relationship.
A mandate and a relationship.
We operate in a legal landscape where formal mandates from the province or Supreme Court decisions are what trigger consultation.
Right, they're the blunt instruments that force adverse parties to sit at the same table.
However, the Red Hill Valley experience illustrates that while the law can force a meeting, true, sustainable, and highly collaborative relationships emerge at the grassroots level.
And when those relationships emerge organically, driven by people who have a direct vested interest in the long-term health of the land, They yield far better mutual benefits than any court-ordered settlement ever could.
But the City of Hamilton and the Six Nations community are now permanently positioned to handle future challenges, environmental threats, economic opportunities.
They handle them together as an integrated team.
Rather than spending decades fighting as adversaries, it completely transforms a rigid, bureaucratic obligation into a living, breathing partnership that actually serves the land and the people.
So if you're taking your professional exam soon, you now have a comprehensive, practical, and highly nuanced understanding of modern Indigenous consultation and joint stewardship.
You know the evolution of the Ontario Acts.
You understand the precise impacts of Supreme Court decisions like Haida Nation.
You know why UNDRP Article 19 fundamentally changes the requirement for consent.
And you have a masterclass case study in the Red Hill Valley to prove how shared responsibility works in the real world.
You are incredibly well prepared.
Good luck on your exam.
And as you step away from the study materials and eventually bring this knowledge into your actual planning practice, I want to leave you with a final thought to reflect upon.
Something to mull over.
If profound joint stewardship, deep cultural integration, and shared environmental responsibility can successfully emerge from an intense, bitter, decades-long conflict over building a highway,
A literal highway.
how might integrating these exact same Indigenous principles of coexistence fundamentally transform the way you approach planning standard, everyday urban neighborhoods?